Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Hello, PR Maven Nation. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, episode number 182, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the Marshall Plan 65-Step Strategic Process. For those of you new to the show, I'm your host, Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven, and I'm CEO of Marshall Communications. I want to welcome you back. And with me today is Andrew Butcher of the Maine Connectivity Authority. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, Andrew.
Thanks for having me, Nancy.
It's really fun in full disclosure, we've been working together virtually for several months now, but haven't even met in person until today.
IRL. It's a new day for us.
I know, and we don't even have to wear masks, which is awesome.
It's lovely. Thank goodness we made it.
I hated wearing a mask. I just felt so constricted. So I'm so glad to be out from under.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely.
So Andrew Butcher is president of the Maine Connectivity Authority, a new quasi-governmental agency created in 2021 to serve as the primary organization to plan, develop, and invest in broadband infrastructure in the state of Maine. Andrew formerly served as director of the Maine Broadband Coalition and Director of Innovation and Resilience at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. He has a background in community and economic development and social entrepreneurship and public policy. He believes the more connected we are, the more resilient we will be in the face of a rapidly changing world. And of course, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that I'm a big believer in being connected on a variety of levels with other people, in person, online, on social media, on the telephone. I just believe in connecting.
Smoke signal.
You're right.
Communications matter.
Yeah. He lives in Portland, is the father of 2 children, and husband of the 2022 Maine Business Leader of the Year, Julie Butcher Pizzino. And actually, Julie's going to be recognized tonight.
Yeah.
I know. I'll be there. So.
Well, this too. But.
So we're going to see each other twice in the same day, which is awesome, Andrew.
Great.
So, Andrew, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Nobody who works in broadband, very few people who work in broadband envision themselves, I think, especially from the public sector. So I've had a bit of a circuitous route, as people tend to do. I come to the work, as you noted, with the Broadband Coalition. I came to the Broadband Coalition 3 years ago, really as a consultant helping on organizational development. The coalition was a loose network of advocates with a shared goal of universal, affordable, reliable internet, and had done some really great policy work, and was at an important point of shifting from advocacy into really doubling down on community capacity building, education, engagement, capacity building, and technical assistance around broadband. And so given my prior work in social entrepreneurship and community development in Pittsburgh, I was engaged to help develop a business plan and a strategy for the coalition. And that kind of evolved into an ongoing level of engagement in supporting the advocacy work, which turned into a bond campaign in 2020. We launched a bond campaign in March 2020.
Tough time.
And rolled it out into a successful mobilization of 75% of the voters in a July off-year election. So the coalition shifted from advocacy into really sort of ongoing community capacity building. And that's the work that I've done in a number of places over the last 15 years, some of which was in Pittsburgh. And I'm happy to talk through that if you'd like.
Yeah, because it's real. It's kind of like stitching together a quilt. I mean, you're going into communities and trying to figure out the lay of the land and what are the organizations that have some pull and membership. And so why don't you talk about that, how you've been stitching together the quilt here in Maine?
Well, fortunately, the quilt has been pretty ready to stitch together. When you don't have money, you do planning, and there's not been a lot of money available for comprehensive investments in our broadband infrastructure. And so the level of planning and engagement and mobilization has really been culminating over probably the last 5 to 10 years. But it's funny. My background is in community development. I got started in Pittsburgh. I turned my graduate work into a nonprofit, which I was fortunate to run and grow for 10 years, from an idea in a classroom to a thriving, internationally recognized social enterprise.
Talk about that. What was that nonprofit?
So that organization, it's still running. It's called Grounded Strategies, and it was founded from my research looking at vacant, underutilized land in Pittsburgh, of which there's a significant amount. Pittsburgh, like many Rust Belt cities, has had a radical decline in population, resulting in about 20% of the landmass being vacant and blighted and perpetuating a downward scale of poverty. And so my research was looking at a range of different strategies to activate spaces and engage and support communities. And so I was fortunate to be able to try out some creative ideas, and those ideas iterated and evolved, and really 10 years later, it was, still a thriving, growing organization, and now still continues to be. And so what I feel like I took from that work is the very strong recognition that every place has its challenges, and every place with challenges has a couple individuals that are really motivated and creative and resourceful in addressing those challenges, and learning with them and empowering them to put their own ideas into action is really the key to enabling an upward spiral of investment. And so that dynamic is as true in Pittsburgh if you're building community gardens, which I was, or if you're in Maine helping facilitate a broadband plan. I mean, the difference, of course, is a pretty different level of investment. Broadband infrastructure is at the high end of challenge. And so there does need to be a point where those engaged and equipped and informed communities get the right level of technical assistance and infusion of capital to be able to translate plans into engagements with private sector partners to provide the internet service and to build out the infrastructure.
Right. And on Monday of this week, you went out to Isle Ho on a ferry boat. And do you want to talk about that?
I mean, these are the perks of the job, right? Actually, this week was a really, I think, an important week for Maine, in that we got to actually give a collective high five in recognition of some really important work. Some folks may have heard that Maine received a really competitive $28 million grant through the Department of Commerce, through the NTIA, to provide 15,000 premises with high-speed broadband over the course of the next year. And this is a really unique program in that it builds from this community-driven approach, which Maine has done a really good job. That's the quilt that we've been stitching together. But it leverages a data-driven strategy through a broadband intelligence platform that two great Maine companies have helped us build out. Vetro Fiber and Tilson Technologies partnered with the state of Maine in building out this broadband intelligence platform. And then, a strong public-private partnership. So 3 different internet service providers worked with us and the broadband intelligence platform, and the communities that were involved to secure $28 million. And so we went to we went to Blue Hill and heard from the governor and got sort of an excellent call to action from her and from some of the partners involved in the program. And then, and then we went and took a boat to Deer Isle with Andy Burke, who's the special broadband liaison appointed by the president to work with MTIA, and got to visit with the community at Isle Ho and visit one of the last remaining one-room schoolhouses in the country, and actually personally got to visit and see one of the smallest post offices in the country, which is near and dear to my heart. For reasons that we can go into another time.
I'm curious because I love post offices.
You love post office? We've never talked about this.
I love mail. I just love the whole concept of sending letters in the mail.
Oh, I'm so sorry to you and anyone who's listening to this, because you're going to lose like the next 30 seconds of your life, maybe more. But
I'm just fascinated that you could like put a letter in the mail here and have it go to wherever.
So, I mean, Nancy, bear with me on this detour here. But so, after 10 years of working on underutilized real estate, it turns out I kind of care and know a little bit about underutilized real estate. And my office in Pittsburgh looked right down the street at this like 5-acre post office. There's a vehicle maintenance facility with a huge parking lot. And it's at the intersection of the fastest growing real estate in Pennsylvania, the community of East Liberty, where Google has its second largest campus in the country, and immediately adjacent to one of the most crime-ridden, impoverished, vacant, underserved communities in the state of Pennsylvania as well. And the post office sits very much literally at the intersection of those two communities. And so I got to think about how could that real estate serve as a part of a broader community resilience strategy? And so when I moved from Pittsburgh to Maine, I made a pitch to a handful of partners, including Carnegie Mellon and the U.S. Postal Service's Office of Inspector General, and ended up spending a year and a half putting together a business plan for identifying where and how to adapt U.S. postal facilities to increase community resilience. And so I've spent a lot of time looking at different types of post offices and thinking through the different types of strategies that we could use to address community need. So I'm sorry for the detour.
I was going to say we could start a whole other podcast, I think, about the Postal Service, because I've often thought, oh my gosh, I would just love to do PR for the Postal Service and teach kids how to be pen pals. And
it's an amazing thing when you think about like being at the frontier of, frankly, it's not all that dissimilar from the broadband work.
Right.
When you think about being at the frontier of commerce, and for a long time the Postal Service was all of our commerce was built on the back of our ability to reliably communicate with each other, right? That's no different than what we're looking at for the future.
Right.
And so the broadband and connected infrastructure that we need and are building out serves the same sort of critical need. We get a lot of comparisons to this stage of existence to rural electrification.
Right, exactly.
Right? A lot of very appropriate comparisons, but the role of the Postal Service is a very unique public sector intervention that does support and engage with the private sector. But really, if it weren't for the Postal Service, many things in our life would be very different than they are now.
Right. Yeah. So, the Postal Service, rural electrification, as well as telephone lines. That's another thing that probably had to go out into all corners of our country. And
yeah, right, the post couldn't, the fact that, and this is another thing that's incredible about USPS. When you think about, would you allow any other entity or person to come onto your front doorstep every single day? And so, the enabling infrastructure for the Postal Service is, of course, the roads of which the postal vehicles and, formerly donkeys and horses traveled on. Phone lines, of course, was the precursor to our communications infrastructure now. And we're still using some of that, and frankly need to be able to springboard from that infrastructure to be able to address our connectivity needs, right? Because for anybody who's streaming right now, or anybody who's going to be on a Zoom call later, our needs are radically changing as far as our demand on digital infrastructure. And so that's kind of what we get the opportunity to spend our time thinking about.
Right. And I think people sort of take it for granted that they're going to have internet. Like they don't really think about how all the things that have to fall in place for them to have it. They just want internet, even when they're in a remote location.
So that is why I am so excited and mildly terrified about the significance of the Maine Connectivity Authority and the opportunity to lead it. In that, the governor rightfully touts that the last couple of years we've seen a pretty significant in-migration for Maine. I think almost 10,000 people over the course of the last 2 years. As the world continues to rapidly evolve and change, whether it's pandemic refugees or climate refugees or global crisis refugees, Maine is still a place with a significant amount of space and not a lot of humans. And people will come, and we have if we want to be proactive about that, if we want to manage that kind of growth, we're going to have to allow people to be able to work from home, to visit with their doctors, to be able to learn remotely.
Right, exactly. And visit with their doctors, get a college education. Well, and as we saw during the pandemic with kids being schooled at all levels, you have 2 young kids, so they were learning from home.
Oh yeah.
And there were times when probably all of you in the household had to be online at the same time.
I mean, I live in the remote urban peninsula of the city of Portland.
Yeah.
And we can't have 2 Zoom calls going on at once with our level of service 2 years ago. And let alone, 2 kids on a computer, let alone and 2 adults. And, if that's in the city of Portland, but, if we want to enable, apple farmers from Union to be able to continue to grow that industry and still participate in a modern digital society. We have some important decisions to make, and fortunately now we have a good amount of some federal funding to, I think, kickstart that and to help sustain the effort. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, you're a community organizer, and I told you before we started here today, I think of you in the same stream of consciousness as President Obama, who was known as a community organizer when he ran for president. Did he inspire you at all?
Well, of course. And I mean, Nancy, thank you for making my year, and even being in the same mental thought process. I think, President Obama was such an inspirational leader in so many different ways. And I think for me, one of the ways in which he was inspirational is the recognition of, we won't be able to achieve a vision for the future if we don't articulate it and if we don't really fundamentally believe in it, and galvanize others to believe in that potential for the future, right? I mean, I think that was that speaks so much to the momentum that he built and was able to enable and build into policy. And I think the sentiment that we all know of, yes, we can, is a really important rally cry. And we have a lot of obstacles when we think about building out the connected infrastructure in a place like Maine. And I'm sure you're familiar with the old adage in Maine of you can't get there from here. You're lost on some road and you're trying to get somewhere. You're trying to get to a lake or a mountain or whatever. And you stop and you ask somebody, and reaction, oh, you can't get there from here.
That's right.
I think that's for a long time been sort of like the constraint that we've been working in from a connected infrastructure standpoint. And so I'm very humbled and grateful for the opportunity to try to infuse a fundamental ethos of, we can get there from here, right? Which is a little bit of our early rally call for the Connectivity Authority. We know we need to know where we are. We need to understand where we want to get to. And then we need to fundamentally believe that we can get there. And we now have at least a little bit of money to be able to do that. And money is an important part of the equation. It's not the only part of the equation. Recognizing and embracing that strength of our communities and the ability for communities to engage with private sector partners, right? Like that's an important equation to really try to double down on and fuse together. And so, I think it's the role of the public sector to enable that which people didn't think would be possible to be possible.
Right, exactly. So the Maine Connectivity Authority is setting out to build these partnerships and relationships and help communities to organize. I mean, what is the purpose of the Maine Connectivity Authority? And I should say, we're very proud as a PR agency to be working with the Connectivity Authority. So can you kind of summarize exactly what it is?
Yeah, sure. Of course. I think just to build from what you were saying, I think the role of the Connectivity Authority is to help fuel those partnerships. Where they're not in place, we can help support communities in a planning process. There's currently the state of Maine through Connect Maine offers a last mile grant program, which allows for communities and internet service providers to apply to the state to receive funding to build out internet service or to upgrade internet service in places where it's not already at the standard that we need it. And that role of the last mile grants program will be something that we continue to build on. And the Connectivity Authority is absorbing that grants program and will be increasing it by an order of magnitude through funding through the American Rescue Plan. But we also need the ability, and part of the reason the Connectivity Authority was created was to be proactive in a way in which we've never really been before, and look at the maps of where there's service and where there's not, where there's community capacity and where there's not, where there's the presence of an internet service provider, and bring together those pieces of the puzzle and help glue them with a little bit of financial investment. And so whether it's through a competitive RFP process or it's a direct award to partners, be able to offer a range of different components of the financing plan that's needed. So maybe it's a direct equity investment, maybe it's some kind of debt financing, and maybe it's even a forgivable, private companies, of course, would welcome as much free capital as possible, but no free capital is really free, even when it's through federal sources. So being proactive and flexible in the types of investments that can be made. So a grants program, a direct award, and RFP process are two really big things that we will be doing. The other, and you cut me off if I'm blabbering too much about this, but the other big thing is that I mentioned this broadband intelligence platform that allows us to really be data driven in the decisions that we make, and to aggregate all of the different information that's out there and be strategic in where we're making investments and bring together the partnerships to be able to execute. I think a big part of what we'll need to do is apply a pretty significant lens of equity, as we ensure both a degree of universal connectivity and ensure that there's affordable options out there, and that if people have access to the internet and they can afford it, that they're also clear around how to use it. So sort of the three planks of digital equity: access, affordability, and adoption. And so we will be helping fund and support and advance the planning process, really, that builds on this community-driven approach at a regional scale. As I mentioned, there's already this network of practitioners that are doing great work in Maine, some of which the Broadband Coalition actively helps support and engage. Our job should be to help support and invest in that process through a standardized planning process, so that communities and regional partnerships don't have to reinvent the wheel, so that they're using the data systems that we've built out to identify their plans and priorities so that we can make easier decisions in the future.
So say I live on the end of a dirt road in a very rural part of our state, Medibeps, or I don't know, Jonesport.
Where's the first place?
Medibeps. I love the name of it.
Yeah.
It's up there.
Someone in Medibeps is listening, like, we've got great connectivity.
Yeah, right. If you live in Medibeps, please let me know how your internet is. But I like just to say the word. But so what do I do if I have bad internet and I'm in a very rural place? what should I do? Should I call you up?
Yeah, right. Here's my cell phone.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that is also where we're at. I mean, the nice thing about Maine is you can wrap your head around it to a certain extent. And so if you've got really bad internet and you don't know where to go, you can call me. But there's also a bunch of other folks that you can call too, some of which, I think local involvement is critical. Municipalities and now county governments also, and regional planning organizations play a really, really important role. So if your community doesn't already have some form of broadband committee, that's a really, really important point of engagement, because it is, in a market like Maine, even with an infusion of federal investments, we have to go to the places that are ready. And this NTIA grant is a really good example. The name of the program is Connect the Ready, and it's a mountains to sea because it's everything from Rangeley and Farmington to Blue Hill and Isle Ho,
right,
and Jefferson and Somerville. Don't want to leave them out.
Right.
And so it's really Connect the Ready is a theme and an ethos, and part of being ready is, do you have a committee? Is your committee helping collect information and engage other community members? Because in broadband, it's not just about is your community engaged. An engaged community represents stakeholders, and those stakeholders represent a market, and that market needs to be understood by the internet service providers, the ISPs, because they represent a what's called a take rate. So engaged stakeholders mean consumers who will be interested in taking up the service, which is important to make an economic case. So, you need to either be involved with or help support a community committee, which can be a point of interface with the state, with your municipality, and with county agencies as well. Now, I'll put my plug in for folks involved in economic development, and that, the Connectivity Authority is going to be scaling up pretty quickly and will be on lead with the decisions and the investments. And we fundamentally need a level of engagement and ownership at a municipal and at a county level. There needs to be a level of, we need local partners and we need local investment as well. And the American Rescue Plan afforded municipalities, townships, and counties with an eligible amount, with funding that is eligible for broadband. And so, we need a degree of local match in the mix as well. And so municipal and county engagement's a really important part of the puzzle.
Right. So some counties that stand out. I mean, I think of Franklin County, for example, and there's champions there like Charlie Woodworth from the Franklin County Economic Development Corporation, or Greater Franklin Economic Development. Right. Council. Yeah. So, and then I think of the town of Bremen, where there's been a really active committee. So yeah, those kind of case studies I think would be helpful. Maybe we should get on that, like writing some case studies of organizations and what they're doing exactly. So others that need a kind of a checklist, they could see what's working already.
I would really encourage folks, if you're not familiar with the Maine Broadband Coalition, I think one of the things I'm really proud of is having been able to work with that network, and hopefully enable it to get to a next stage, as well as, those practitioners are coming together through increasing, Charlie being one of them, coming together in informal and formal ways to share lessons learned. And the coalition is helping support this community of practice. And that community of practice not only is a forum for people to share information and to potentially identify collaboration, it's also a mechanism for data collection and data dissemination. And also, we've established a connectivity booster program to embed, a community organizing oriented person to help support the Charlies of the world in, whether it's organizing meetings, setting agendas, taking minutes, following up, like the nuts and bolts that maybe not super glamorous, but are the things that move things forward. And so, connectivity boosters, and that further supports work that groups like AARP in Maine have been really active in trying to
Yeah.
get volunteers and fusing them into that type of work that the practitioners are leading on a regional scale. So, again, another good points of engagement with the Broadband Coalition and AARP and regional partners like Greater Franklin Economic Development.
Right. Well, we're going to continue our conversation in just a moment, but now it's time to just talk about my latest book, Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. And you can get a free copy if you go to prmaven.com/giveaway. There's a downloadable copy there. And in a moment, we'll be back with more from Andrew Butcher.
After reading PR Works, I really started to think about how marketing actually works. And I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but what I realized is that each platform nowadays that we use out there in digital media and social media has its own nuance and also quirks to it. And understanding how they're used is exceedingly important. Because when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And you can't approach it that way in marketing. And that's where I think Nancy's brilliance really shined in PR Works. I think Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand is really sort of the manifesto of understanding that there's many different levels to marketing. It's on your personal side of your brand, how actually you express yourself through business, but also what people hear you saying and what they see out there in the public eye as well. So I think what's really important there, that's really the blueprint of how you go about using these new social media platforms, but also to express who you are as a human being. Because people want to see you authentically and genuinely working with not only what you do, but also with the customers. And Nancy, on a personal level, I think that's who she is. She embodies that approach.
Welcome back to the PR Maven Podcast, and we're here talking with Andrew Butcher. We're streaming live too on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So that's very exciting. Andrew didn't realize that we were going to be doing that.
Glad I come here.
Live television. So Andrew, what happens to communities, families, schools, and hospitals when they have inadequate connectivity?
Well, I mean, I think we've all experienced the misery. If you're listening to this, then the internet's a really important part of your life in a variety of different ways. And so I think we've all experienced the misery of needing to and watching the buffering symbol and needing to take a important meeting from your car outside of a library or, so I think what happens is that, you're constrained when everything else is moving really fast. If you're not able to be online for schoolwork, then you're gonna not do as well in your studies. If you're not able, there are increasing numbers of stories of people who would be living in Maine full time, but for their slow internet connectivity.
Right. And this is a big tourism state too. And people who are on vacation here expect to be able to connect also.
Just to sort of put that in perspective, really grateful. I've not spent 20 years in telecommunications or public finance, which, you might think is helpful given that I essentially now run a telecommunications infrastructure bank. I have spent 20 years working across silo, making partnerships enable a higher degree of impact. And I really love the sort of the dot connecting and quilt stitching. So I was really grateful that my first week on the job, the Maine Department of Transportation Commissioner, Bruce Van Note, invited me to a meeting with him and his executive team and sat down and said, Maine receives about 35 million vehicles per year, serving as a pretty important foundation of our economy. In 10 to 15 years of time, at least 50% of those vehicles are going to need some form of continuous connectivity as autonomous vehicles. And so the future of transportation in Maine is the future of connectivity.
Right.
And so, to his credit, what do you need to get started? And so, that's enabled not only a shared feasibility study between the Connectivity Authority and DOT to identify where and how to optimize transportation infrastructure, but it's also enabled shared staff. I mean, we share a team member through the Intelligent Transportation Systems Group at DOT. So, I think, again, a sort of good study of like, if we don't have the degree of connectivity that the future will demand, then people won't be able to be here. And many people in Maine know what it's like to manage decline. And at a place-based level, it's a pretty difficult thing to confront. And so I think you're either managing decline or you're preparing for growth.
Right, exactly. Well, I just know, I mean, this is a podcast all about PR, and in PR you have to be connected.
Oh, and I've been talking about the post office and
well, believe me, I was doing PR back when I sent out press releases in the mail, so I've done that too. But yeah, with PR, you obviously have to be online so you can get story opportunities, or if you get an inquiry from a journalist at the New York Times or the Washington Post, you got to be on it like right away. So it's really important in the PR business to stay connected.
Yeah,
it's a blessing and a curse, actually.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, that degree of continue, right for you,
Yeah.
I would imagine. Thank goodness the Sugarloaf has has pretty decent service.
Sugarloaf's got really good internet. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, I lived and worked at Sugarloaf for like 30 years. So. Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit before about like a checklist, or if a community wants to get organized to receive grant dollars for expansion, what are the first steps?
Well, if you have internet service, take a speed test.
How do you do that?
Through the Maine Broadband Coalition, mainbroadbandcoalition.org. An amazing crowdsourced platform that allows not just to identify the speed test at where you're located and have that reflected immediately on a map with the other 32,000 people that have taken their tests in Maine. It allows us to identify patterns where there's internet service and how well it's performing, right? It's not just about your test. It's about how does your data show up in context of data in your surrounding area, and what are the patterns reflecting from there. So take a speed test, engage with your town and understand, who are the others that are either, beating a drum or already sort of mid-stride. And, I think the other side, and this is probably, to you and your audience's, primary orientation, help us tell the story, and help us amplify the benefit and the impact and the cost associated with it, and the adjacent elements of it. I mean, again, the stories that I was fortunate to hear in Idaho of how they're thinking about their housing and their childcare being fundamental to their connectivity strategy. I mean, the ability to get internet is a true lifeline for their island economy, right? And organizations like the Island Institute are working with all of Maine's coastal and island communities and many other communities throughout the state that are recognizing that as well. And so, I think one of the hardest things about working in broadband is that like you get almost immediately into really boring technical stuff that most people really don't either care about or understand, right? It's like one of those things like, does it work or does it not? And if it doesn't work, that's a huge problem. And otherwise, like, I don't know that I really care that much, right? Like, the dinner time conversations that my poor wife is subject to, and I really get going, whether it's the post office or broadband, I'm like the world's most boring human. But so I think that what we really need are the PR professionals of the world who understand how to tell a story and how to amplify it and how to help communicate, because, we're the pandemic has helped. We're a little past the like, is, like universal ubiquitous connectivity important right now? Like debate. Like, no, I think we're pretty past that. And the pandemic illustrated that to everybody. But what we need now is really the ability to, tell stories and communicate around what's the kind of growth that we want to achieve and why. How does Maine's very bold and important climate goals equate to our connectivity strategy, right? How are we driving less? Maine's largest source of greenhouse gases is through vehicle miles traveled. Well, if we're able to drive less, that's because we're able to do our work where we are. If many people are in Maine because they love the place, right? And Governor Mills has time and time again said that we shouldn't have to choose between the places that we love and the things that we want to do. And so capturing that, right? Like that's what we need non-broadband nerds like me and everyone I spend my time with, and now you're included too.
Yeah, right.
But that's what we need help in communicating around and demonstrating that and fusing it to other things. And that's actually why it's really exciting and important that, the President Biden's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that, our Senate delegation had such an important role in crafting, has a really important lens around digital equity, right? And recognizing, again, it's not just about access and affordability, it's about adoption and how people have, equal access to the service and are being engaged in a proactive and inclusive way. That's, Senator King and his team get a whole lot of credit for building out the digital equity component of the infrastructure fund, and it's almost $2 billion. It's almost $3 billion for every state in the country to put together a digital equity plan. And so I'm really grateful to be joined by team members who will be taking lead on coordinating that kind of effort in Maine in the near future.
Well, you mentioned Senator Angus King, and I remember when we were new to laptops, for example, and I remember seeing him in the back seat of a car when he was governor. He had a driver, and he was like, Nancy, look at this laptop. Can you believe what I could do on this laptop? It's so amazing. And he was just like, he just lit up about thinking about the potential. And I don't think he had any idea what would happen as we expanded internet access, but he's just always thought that computers were the future and technology. And I know that in my own PR career, early on in my career, my boss said, the technology here of public relations is going to make or break your career. Like, you better learn how to, back then I had to learn how to program DBase 3+ so I could keep databases.
Oh,
yeah, I knew how to do that at one point, which was pretty remarkable. But then, Sugarloaf actually was the first ski resort in the country to have a website. So we grasped right on to like the importance of having a website. And of course, I think social media is really important. Again, not only just for personal relationships, but just kind of staying connected with people. I always say that if you meet a person face to face, you should connect with them on social media. And if you connect on social media, you should attempt to meet the person face to face. So there's that too. So.
Yeah. I think one of the tricky things in thinking about digital infrastructure is, how do we not abandon our, human contact as well?
Right.
I want to, the advocates for our, our road and highway infrastructure, I don't think ever intended that would be the pathway to, advanced climate change that would fundamentally disrupt our way of life, right? But that's kind of the legacy that we're having to figure out, right? Like how do we depend on, but not too much reliance on automobiles and our highway infrastructure? And, I'm trying to keep in mind what are the unintended consequences that, and I think part of that is that human to human contact. I mean, I've got young children and I don't particularly want them online in the near future. And so, but that's really from a privileged place, right? Because we have the choice.
Right.
And I think that, the baseline should be, does everybody have a choice? I mean, at this point, it is somewhat of a right of modern society to be able to engage and communicate and participate with each other online. And so we all have to have that level of choice. how we make the most of it such that it doesn't overly dominate our life is also an important thing. And I think that's sort of part and parcel with the ethos of Maine, right? It's why people are here, not necessarily to spend their August, locked into a windowless room on Zoom calls,
Right.
which is what I seem to spend my last couple Augusts doing.
But they want to take a picture of themselves standing in front of the lighthouse and share it with all their friends. So,
yeah,
so
right.
they expect to have connectivity at the Pemaquid Point Lighthouse.
Well, but it's also, again, once we get, I think we're in a phase right now of like, all right, how do we make sure everybody gets the lights on? I think it's a question of, well, what can we do with the lights? What can we do when we're online from there, right? And it's everything from, are we, I mentioned autonomous vehicles later. What happens when our cars are communicating with streetlights and, and other devices? What does it look like for, farmers and fishermen to be able to leverage technology in ways and increase their performance and efficiency? I mean, advancements in agricultural technology are already allowing for really sophisticated ways to produce more with less and to be more mindful about using less water or less fertilizer and working with soil conditions and the kind of device technology, the kind of devices that capture that information and aggregate it and share it, right? Like farmers are going to be some of the most technologically advanced people in industry in the world. The forestry industry is already doing that, to be able to geotag every single tree and monitor its moisture level and its health, and so that we can optimize its production and be intentional around harvesting this portion of a forest and preserving this portion for ecosystem benefits. I mean, this is, Maine's probably never going to be a leader in smart cities. But Maine certainly, I think, has an opportunity to be a leader in intelligent communities. And, without the fundamental infrastructure to be able to do that, we'll never get there. But that's why we're investing in the fundamental infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's certainly a fascinating topic, Andrew. And I want to ask you if there is a book, an app, or a website that has served you or inspired you personally and professionally, and why is that?
Well, Nancy, I've come across this really helpful book called PR Works, which of course I would recommend. I think for folks that are interested in learning more about this, there's a couple really good ones. It's actually a book called Tubes. Jeff Letourneau is the executive director at Network Maine and is a real luminary in the space, and recommended this book. It's an incredible chronicle. It's like a travel writer's guide of the internet and how it works and the physical presence of the internet and how it manifests. So Tubes is wonderful, by Andrew Blum. Fiber, of course, by author Susan Crawford, is an incredible book to learn more. All very accessible if you want to understand the issues. These are excellent books. And then Farm Fresh Broadband also is a fantastic. Yeah.
Sounds great. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to follow up with you?
Well, if you're on social, thank you, Marshall Communications. We are available on LinkedIn and Twitter. Maine Connectivity, I believe, is our Twitter handle. Me Connectivity is our Twitter handle, and Maine Connectivity Authority on LinkedIn. And of course, check us out at mainconnectivity.org. I will say, Nancy, this is fresh news. We are hiring 3 new roles right now. We are hiring an operations manager. We're hiring a data and impact specialist, as well as a communications director.
Right. So maybe one of our listeners will apply for that position.
Find them at mainconnectivity.org.
That's very exciting. Yeah. What an opportunity for someone. I think I'm going to keep running my business, but if I wasn't, I would apply.
Well, a guy can dream.
So thanks again, Andrew, for joining us today. This was really fun. And Andrew would love to have you follow the Maine Connectivity Authority on social media. So please do that. And I hope you all have a great day in PR Maven Nation.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Andrew. It's fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.